If you told me 2 years ago that that would be possible, I'd be like, that's absolutely that.
Totally.
I have an idea for something, I can vibe code a website like so quickly. And I'm not a front end developer. That would have been very, very difficult for me.
That was definitely a moment for me where I was like, okay, that's a huge leap. I can hit this and then something is appearing and it kind of mostly works. It was like addicting, honestly. Don't forget to subscribe to Data Neighbor wherever you listen to podcasts and YouTube. And drop a like and comment below. It keeps us bringing you great content like this. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Data Neighbor with Sean, Sravia, and Hi. We're joined today by Sandi Besen. She's a AI research engineer at IBM. Welcome to the show, Sandi.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Welcome to the show, Sandi. Super excited. This is our first time to have an AI researcher, so a lot of good questions.
And you two met on like a panel? Is that what you mentioned? Or how do you two know each other?
Yeah, actually, we both had a panel together at Women in Data SF event. So it was great just, chatting around AI and practical applications of it. So I was like, Sandi would be great to have on our pod, a Data Neighbor, to get more from her. So yeah, it was great to meet her there. And
Yeah, I feel like we were vibing off each other in that panel. So I hope that happens today too in this convo.
Yes. Yeah, me too.
Nice. Okay, cool. So maybe to kick it off, we haven't had an AI research engineer and ecosystem lead on our call before. What is an AI research engineer and ecosystem lead?
It's a great question. And that answer varies greatly depending on what company you're in and what part of the company you're in. But particularly for me at IBM Research, I'm part of a product incubation team. So we take a lot of the research that's coming out, both out of IBM, but also other labs, and we try to find applicable use cases for them and translating that research into applied product. So I spend a lot of time playing with things, building first of their kind things, but also building the first use cases and building partnerships with other people who can build on top of it or open sourcing it and building a community.
What are some of those things that you're experimenting with? I imagine it must vary quite a bit.
Yeah, I try to keep up to date with what's coming out, but it's coming out at such a pace where it's practically impossible to also do your full-time job and experiment as a full-time job. But I try to experiment with something at least once a week. So this week, I'm trying to experiment with Claude's new skills that they just put out. And I haven't done that yet, but I've read a little bit about it, but I haven't used it yet. But that's a pretty cool feature that they just added. And then I try to
Okay.
see how can we incorporate that into our agent framework called BAI that we're building. So it's kind of that bridge between experimentation and then how can we implement this in some of the work that we're doing at IBM Research.
Yeah, it's such an interesting role right now with the pace of everything. I feel like you need someone like you who is just week to week looking at what is new and seeing how it can be applied. I feel like for me, I'll get in a zone of like going deep on something and then a month and a half later, like I'm already behind. People are like, oh, did you try this thing? No, I barely, I've barely just established this other workflow that's a completely new way of working.
It's something I'm trying to balance as well. In my previous job, I was more on the applied research side. Now our team is doing similar, but it's more on product focused. And so in my previous job, it was literally part of my role to just do this experimentation. Now it's what I need for my role to be successful, but it's not part of my role, if that makes sense. Which makes it challenging when you're trying to you put your head down for, like you said, a week, 2 weeks even, and work on something, and then by the time you put your head up again, it's all changed around you.
Pretty crazy these times, like within a week, 2 weeks, like what are these timelines? Oh, wow. So Sandi, can you give like an example of what your work would be? It could be a real example. It could be something that you can probably make up based on like what you've worked on so far and maybe help with the workflow. Like how do you, because you are in a very unique IBM, researcher place because of where you sit in an incubation. So you probably just mentioned you would also do some product strategy. So which is actually helps like when someone listens through, like to know the end to end, right? So that'll be great to just get an overview.
Yeah. Well, because we're an incubation team and we operate kind of like an accelerator, my role changes often, but I'll give you an example of something that I'm currently working on. So, like I mentioned, we have a agent framework called BAI. It's completely open source. So, little plug, check it out, BAI framework. And we focus on security and reliability of agents. And so, one thing that I do a lot of is okay, if we're going to focus on this side, then can we partner with the security research team at IBM Research and bring in some of their resources to help us beef out the security aspect of the framework? So, working with them on figuring out how to both position, but also doing the technical implementation of some of the features that make an agent framework secure, and then building first of their kind use cases. So for instance, we have a middleware part of the framework that you can plug in things like guardrails and content safety and authorization and things like that are kind of, as we evolve in the evolution of AI agents, next steps that a lot of people want to see to put that into production. And so working with the IBM Research folks on the security side to implement that in our framework, and then also building first of their kind use cases to show the open source audience and community, how do you do this, right? So that's kind of something that I'm currently working on. Also, the aspect in agent reliability that we're hooking into now is something that we call the requirement agent. So, thinking through how do you actually enforce certain behavior in agentic systems, not leaving it up to the reasoning ability of the model to make all the choices, but at the framework level. How do you actually only expose tools that an agent is allowed to use at the time it's allowed to use it? So, building some of these features into the framework as well.
Now, can we go slightly even more like, really high version? What is an agent framework? Because we do
Oh, that's
hear
a great
about it a
question.
bunch. You want to like just open that up? Like,
Absolutely. That's a great point. And I think that we're starting to arrive at a general definition of it, but for a long time, just an agent in general was almost disputed what the definition is. But I think it was Harrison Chase's post that I agreed with that were settling on the definition of something along, I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of a LLM with the ability to call tools in a loop until it completes a task. So that's just the definition of an agent. But what the framework piece does, because remember that an LLM only has the ability to produce natural language, right? So an LLM can say, hey, I need to call my internet search tool to gather information from the internet, but it can't execute anything. It's not an executable environment. It doesn't have runnable features, right? So the framework is what actually is almost like the code or glue that allows your agent or your LLM to actually call tools, take action. It can change the configuration settings of the LLM itself. It adds things like system prompts. So it's almost like the LLM is the brain, and the framework allows you to kind of configure that and give it access to things.
so basically, agent framework is the structure and design of how an agent would work. And the brain of this would be an LLM. Using LLM's intelligence and what it tells you, you create systems and the processes and, the connections between multiple tools to get the task accomplished, which needs a bunch of things to resolve. Like imagine if I have to, when this is a purely physical work, could be robotics helping it. Let's say I have to put laundry and, get my clothes washed and folded. I have to go get clothes. I have to put them in the laundry. I have to put them in the dryer to get them out. I have to fold them and then put them in there. So there's like so many steps in this process and multiple tools I've used. Imagine this in a web application setup. You basically touch all of these, knowing what to touch, when, and how, while talking to LLM in between, helping you navigate that. That's the framework.
Totally. And if you didn't have that framework piece, it would be the LLM being like the busybody in the corner, being like, now you need to do this and now you need to do that, but without the ability to actually help.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
For people who are getting started working with agents, thinking about the requirements framework you discussed, what are some of the common failure cases that a requirements framework basically is solving for?
Totally. I think there's two main ones. The first is there are certain tendencies for LLMs to get stuck in certain loops, or they might call tools, but not necessarily in the order that you would suggest or want. As a business or an organization, for instance, you might want it to call this validation tool before it ever produces a final answer. Just recommending that it does that doesn't enforce that, right? And so you're almost leaving it up to the reasoning ability of the LLM to do things in a certain order, or sometimes it thinks it has enough information just without calling the tools that it should call because maybe it hallucinated some of it, or maybe it thinks that it's done. It doesn't need to check the important database that holds your ground truth answers, right? And so the ability to enforce those things is very powerful. But secondly, you're not always working with the top reasoning models. They tend to perform better at things like tool calling, like a GPT-5 is likely going to outperform an extremely small model, right?
Mhm.
Because it it's better at reasoning, right? But by using a requirement agent or enforcing requirements, you can use much smaller models because you know that it's not just left up to the reasoning ability of the LLM to make those decisions.
You basically do some work for them, right? So that you don't
Yeah,
need as smart of a person where you try to do some work for them so they don't have to do that. Yeah, makes total.
totally. Let's compare it maybe to like a college student versus an elementary school student. Um, right? The college student, if you gave them tons of options, they're going to be able to maybe decipher or choose a little bit better from those options. But if you give an elementary school student tons of options, they might be really overwhelmed and just choose the wrong option. So by limiting the amount of options that the elementary school student is allowed to see at each time will help it to make decisions that are almost just as good or even just as good as the college student.
Absolutely. Love that analogy. That's how we do
Yeah, it's a really good one.
conversations here at Data Diver. So I'm glad you got on to the same rhythm. So one thing that's fascinating to me in this, Sandy, is that the in your analogy that you mentioned, the college and elementary, every few months the college student level elementary is becoming the college student level, and college student is becoming a PhD level, right? Like we are improving tremendously in our type of models that we've got for way cheaper. Now it's just improving every single day. So probably we'll end up in a world where like you don't need to like help with reasoning at all, and the lowest model itself is good at it.
Yeah, it's totally possible. I was just reading, oh, now I'm blanking on the name. It was RLM, but it wasn't reasoning. It was a different type of model that they were trying to push for. And I was like, there's just so many different types of training methods and they keep renaming things. But at the end of the day, I think you're right that the models are going to become quote unquote smarter, right? We try in IBM research not to compare things like to humans, but sometimes it's the easiest way to understand for people. So quote unquote smarter. But I think that as we develop new architectures, that's what will really make that leap for like the next level of intelligence or general intelligence in a model.
Since you're someone who's just constantly researching and trying new things out, probably so much more frequently than most people working in this field, what's been some of the major leaps you've seen?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think taking it back to more of like the everyday person or the everyday dabbler in AI and technology, the ability to create things has dramatically increased, both in the agent space, which I spend most of my time in, where we have lower code solutions like emerging that don't get me wrong, they also have their limitations, especially if you're putting these things in production. But for someone who is experimenting and dabbling are very powerful, like Langflow and these solutions that allow you as not even a developer, right? Because you can visually create these things with some understanding they are to create powerful workflows for yourself. And then secondly, I mean, I'm going to use Lovable as an example. That is if you told me 2 years ago that that would be possible, I'd be like, "That's absolutely out."
Totally.
Like, I can over a weekend, I have an idea for something, I can vibe code a website, like, so quickly, and I'm not a front-end developer. Before, that would've been very, very difficult for me.
Yeah, the proof of concept stuff like that, like Lovable and Bolt and Replit and those things, that was definitely a moment for me where I was like, okay, that's a huge leap. I can hit this and then something is appearing and it kind of mostly works. It was addicting, honestly. For 2 weeks, I was staying up way too late, just messing around with stuff. It was kind of like playing a video game. Like, you'd get a little bug. Gotta get this next
Needs
level.
to work.
5 more minutes.
Programming is for me, it's like, I feel like 90% of the time, I feel like, absolutely, like, banging my head against the wall, and then 10% of the time, I'm like, "I am such a badass." But it's only 10% of the time when you get it right, but that's the addicting part of the time, right? The other 90% is just like, "Why isn't this working?"
I haven't actually used any of like the workflow tools yet. I do have like a subscription to N8N through like Lenny's whatever giveaway of all these things if you subscribe to his podcast. But maybe for our viewers, could you describe kind of what N8N is, how these kind of like workflow products work?
Yeah. So I haven't worked too much with NNN specifically, but I know it's a popular one a lot of people use. I like to build on the pro code side because I get more control and granularity over what I'm building, but it makes it's essentially a UI that has a framework under the hood. So I'd be developing what's under the hood, but you get to do so using visual components, right? So I don't know whether you drag or drop or you click, but you're able to like say, okay, I want to create an agent. So you give it your role and the role and the title and what tools it has access to, all without actually coding, and so that's very powerful for a lot of people that don't necessarily want to have the learning curve or don't have the skill set to be able to go into the deep version of that.
Just kind of like a Alteryx for AI.
Yeah, and Langflow, which is from DataStax, they are based on LangChain.
Okay.
So in a lot of these as well is you're using actually pro code frameworks under the hood. You just don't have to deal with the code and the logic.
Nice.
How much do you leverage them, Sandy, for your day-to-day work?
I don't. I don't because I'm working on a pro code version, and so everything I build is gonna be in that version. The only time that I would look at them is for, like, research purposes or seeing what's out there and what's possible, comparing kind of what's possible in these versus what's possible in a pro code framework to see how quickly
Mm.
they're evolving, to be quite frankly, because they are evolving quite quickly.
Yeah, it is interesting. I don't know. I wonder if we all eventually end up moving to that kind of realm as it gets better and better and better. It's
What
just
about you? Sorry, what about you, Shravya? Are you building in any of these low-code solutions before you move to pro-code?
I mean, there are so Procode is so you're talking about specifically using any of these like
UI builders like N8N or Linkflow
uh,
or or OpenAI's new one that I'm not even sure is public yet, but
not currently at my workplace, but I've tried to do for like one-off projects for the
Mhm.
site stuff. Yes. What we do, so I'm in data science, right? So data science, product data science to be specific, a lot of experimentation. So how we've tried to use the LLM stuff recently is especially some of these, high-end that gives really good, takes good instructions and gives good designs when we have product recommendations based on data insights or some of the causal stuff that we come up with, we are coming up with designs and we are sharing that. Like, this is the experiment you have to go run. Please do a painted door test. Now we have a design for you as well. So there's no stopping between, like, remember, in the past, if you want to share anything, it had to go through so many cycles to
Yeah.
go that experiment. Now it's way faster. Like, because We are just are trying to get the design up as well
Okay.
and share it. I don't think they use the same exact design, but at least they get the gist of what we are trying to show, right?
Yeah.
Which makes it
So
super easy to move.
so you're using it more for like rapid prototyping of applications
Yes.
and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Rapid prototyping. Yeah. We've done something to create an entire flow and share it. We've done something to just share images of what we want it to look like to help the product managers and designers to get through faster cycles.
And what are you using when you're building rapid prototyping stuff, if you're allowed to share?
ChatGPT, Cursor, Cloud Code, all three. Yeah, we have all three of them enterprise versions. So we kind of dabble based on what works better.
Curious, like, I think actually when we were on a panel together, we talked a little bit about this, but I think it's an important topic. What AI tools are you guys allowed to use in the workplace?
It depends on what enterprise contract the company has, right?
Okay.
So it's as simple as that.
No, but you mean just company dependent, but I'm curious, you guys, like at your company, what are you allowed to use?
For me, we have ChatGPT, we have Cursor, we have Cloud Code, all of them. Like we have enterprise versions.
Hmm.
I think it's not just my company. All the friends that I know that work in different companies come with enterprise versions, come with licenses. For each company, you have to provide a reason why you need that license because it costs a good chunk for the company to pay for that license based on the person and how much they leverage it and the importance of the work. They just get the license. You could get for all three, you could get for one, two, it could be anything. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think it like yeah, very I think it depends a lot on like the product itself. Like I work in legal tech and so the we're working with people's legal documents. It's super confidential. So we do have Anthropic and OpenAI and we have Gemini. It just like depends case by case. Some stuff, if we have a zero data retention policy with them, we can like leverage them with actual customer data. Other stuff where we don't have that, even if there's like a 30-day retention, it's like a hard no on like, hey, you can use this to develop code in your code base, but you cannot input any sort of like customer data through there. So as a data scientist, there's certain providers I can use, proprietary models I can use for like data analysis versus others. Like it's only if I'm going to build like a pipeline or I'm going to build a model and then I have to run that myself on the actual data. But that is
Interesting
to
for
say
us.
if there's like a good business value to it, like I think like for our company and I imagine for most companies, then they can decide if they want to try and negotiate that kind of zero data retention policy. And I know other companies like I'm sure don't work with as like confidential data and so there's probably less stringent requirements. My
What about
buddy who works in banking is like he doesn't get to use anything. I was talking to him the other day and he's like, yeah, no, I can't like basically use anything at all here. I was like, oh, that sucks, dude.
honestly sucks. I can't imagine working somewhere where I wasn't allowed to use anything. But I guess I noticed and what I picked up on from what you guys were saying was that your companies have invested in more than one provider. Like there's no single bet. It's not just Anthropic or OpenAI or Gemini, but you guys have all of them, which I think just kind of shows that there's no clear winner yet, or people
Hmm.
have kept in their lane a little bit, although maybe OpenAI and Anthropic are starting to spread a little. But yeah, I think the industry hasn't placed a bet yet. Otherwise, why would they have 3 licenses for each of you?
Totally. Yeah, it's so interesting. And it varies. It'll literally be like month by month. Hey, change your cursor to GPT-5 because it outperforms Sonnet 3.5. And now I'm going back to Gemini 2.5. Actually, I don't know. You get bored or annoyed with something that one of them does. There's a lot of switching. It's kind of weird, but they're all developing so fast. So it kind of makes sense.
It's so good that there's a lot of switching because clearly, like, that means that your company, you are on top of the latest thing. I think a lot of people learn one tool and they're like, "I learned this one, so the amount of emotional energy it takes to switch to the next one is too
Totally.
high."
Yeah. Yeah. It is really nice when you have these tools like like Cursor, where like you can switch through between the models so easily. I do like that, where it's like I actually don't have to think about going through a different interface or a different like user experience. I can have like the UX stay the same, but just change the models behind it.
Yeah, that's great.
Totally, we don't have a winner yet, probably. I mean, Claude Code is showing up as a winner in some cases,
Hmm.
but there's still other things that are
Yeah.
popping up here and there.
I think Codex is really trying to compete now as well.
That's what
I
I heard.
just started using Codex and I'm really enjoying it, especially because I was using for a while an open source tool called Aider that's like terminal based. But I've learned that everyone's workflow is different, but I don't like when it writes to my files directly. It
Hmm.
makes
Okay.
me feel like I don't know what's going on because it's just written too much. Still like working with it, and then only when I feel comfortable having it write to my file or manually copy pasting. But everyone's style is different. So I like that there's tools for all these things where Claude Code can be more CLI based and write directly to stuff, but I can also use it in like a VS Code integration where I just have it on my sidebar.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice having both options. I haven't tried Codex yet. And I feel
And
like
for
there's also just like different things are also like good and bad different things. Like I'll use like Claude Code, for instance, a lot when I'm or something like you're saying, like writing directly to my code if I'm like creating like actual like pipelines and scripts. But if I'm doing something like a Jupyter notebook, I actually haven't found any of them that do super well when you're working with these kind of like JSON structures behind with all the notebook cells. Like inevitably, it's just like at some point when that notebook gets too big, whether it's Claude Code or Cursor, in both of them, they'll just start like not being able to edit it directly, and I just shift into copy and paste code if I'm doing that kind of work. But there's a lot of like other tools who are just trying to build specifically for that use case.
Yeah, I haven't used too much of it in a Jupyter notebook, but it makes sense that it would be more difficult for it, just like formatting on the back end and all the code you don't see to make that Jupyter
Mhm.
notebook possible.
Going back a little bit, kind of zooming out, I think, how did you get into this field of AI research? Actually, we didn't really go into that. It's like, it's such an interesting job. And like, obviously you're working on like building these agentic frameworks now. And as we just discussed, like a bunch of these different tools you're like getting all this like hands-on experience with. Ooh, what's kind of your journey to get to that?
It was a little roundabout, to be honest with you. I think a life is a lot of hard work and a little bit of luck. And so I actually started out in the performing arts. Knew I didn't think I liked science or math or didn't think I was very good at it. Um, Loved performing, but realized that when it was time to go to university, it wasn't something I wanted to commit myself 100% to. And I was always told that if it wasn't 100% what you wanted to do, you should not do it. And I think that was the best advice I was ever given because it is a hard
Yeah.
life. And I found creativity in other ways, like where I am today. I ended up going back to school to do a master's in data science. So I'm joining the data science club here.
Nice. There you go.
I
That's
started
why you're
my
on this podcast.
I started my career as a data scientist, and I worked for a little bit. And then I went to more data science project management in the consulting space. And I had an opportunity to kind of move on to the A team at IBM,
Hmm.
which was very different from anything else I had done. It was more figuring out some product strategy, technical integrations. Once we acquire a company, what actually happens to its assets? What do we merge with IBM's assets and how, and things like that.
Interesting. Okay.
Cool learning experience, but I realized it wasn't something that I wanted to make a career in. And right around that time, some of the first transformer models that were good. The transformers have been around a while, but the first great transformer models were coming out. I think GPT-3 had just come out. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot call myself a data scientist anymore if I don't know how to work with these. So I must go back into it." So I found a role at a subsidiary of IBM on their applied research team where I got to dig my hands back in, do a lot of the applied research, where it was very much a big part of my job to just experiment and break what was out there and figure out how we can apply that to our clients' use cases that conventional things were not able to solve. And so that was a very fun role.
Yeah.
And with a little bit of luck and good timing, a very similar type of role was available at IBM Research, and I happened to connect with the team there through my work at the subsidiary, and they had a role available for me. And so they brought me onto that team, and I've been here about 6 months now.
Very cool.
That's such a unique journey, Sandy. You wouldn't definitely like it's not a common thing to find people from performing arts background and data science and now AI. So that's pretty cool. In fact, if you look
And
at
don't
it,
forget, like, just like,
That's a weird little thing we threw in there. I don't know.
yeah, just for like a few years, just going to M&A deals. Like, that's pretty cool.
actually, oh my God, you have like so many turns and finally you're here. And the most interesting thing about AI or the world that we are going to enter in 10 years from now or 15 years from now, I don't know where we'll be. It creativity is what that's going to help us, right? To get these, now that we have all these smart, if we want to call them smart with human terms of intelligence, but if we have all these tools in place, it's all about ensuring we tell them to do the right things and to do it in the creative way and give some human touch to it. So I'm glad you people like you are there that could use all these, tap into all these different aspects of your skill set. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey. Actually, about the performing arts piece though, that you mentioned, I was having a conversation with someone else in the field, and we actually realized that there's more theater kids in AI, specifically if you have an external facing role, than you would expect.
Hmm.
Because there tends and I don't want to stereotype or archetype, but there tends to be kind of like two diverging personalities in research or in AI in general. There's like the outward facing folk and then the like deep engineers. And the ones that are able to bridge both, an overwhelming amount of them that I've met have been theater kids or ex theater kids.
Interesting.
Interesting. That's, you know what? I was actually wondering the same, Sandy. Sean, when Sandy, me, and we had, I think, two other people in the panel, and we were discussing about dance and how much all of us, there were
Yeah.
three of us. I learned dance right now, and Sandy is into theater. She likes dance as well. There's another person who's been learning classical Indian dance for 10 years as well. And it's so interesting that all three of us were in the panel discussing data, but I was thinking through the same thing. Being external personalities is probably linked to forming and, all of that to some extent. And probably that's where the bias comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are so many people that have such more of a wealth of knowledge than I do, but wouldn't necessarily want to or be asked to speak publicly about work, right? Because that's just not something that they're into or have the communication for. But if you have a performing arts background where you were taught to communicate clearly, even whether that's in dance, like you were saying, through movement, I think it translates to your work later in life.
Makes sense. I was ruffian number 3 in Treasure Island in 5th grade, so
Nice.
tracks.
Trap.
I was going, Sean's going to come up with something now. And that's so great.
Or you were just like a suppressed theater kid. You didn't know it, and that's why you ended up hosting a podcast.
Exactly, exactly. I was in band for a while, but not theater.
We are going to have a performance by Sean at 100th episode of Data Neighbor podcast. Cool. So, Sandy, I know AI evals is a very, very trending topic. I don't know, probably until another thing comes right now. So I know Sean does a lot of AI evals and what is for people who wants to understand AI evaluation and other things, what is something that you want to share with them and what's new in that area?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one that I've started to do some research on. I spend a lot of my time doing the initial build of things. And so
Hmm.
actually doing the eval part is something that comes later when it's in production and you're right, or you're doing testing for specific use cases. But and Sean, curious your proponent on the your like point of view on this. But I've been looking at evals for evaluating the actual framework level. So, how do you assess how well the requirement agent is following rules? And no frame, no, there's no benchmark that exists for that, right?
Yeah.
Custom eval set, or there is benchmarks that exist for like how well a model does tool calling, but they're all focused on the model level.
Yeah.
None of them are really focused on the framework level. So, curious if you have heard of anything like that or how you would go about building something like that.
No, I was actually going to ask you after Shavia's question to follow up specifically around like evals for agents because same thing. I think like there's a lot of eval kind of focus on like outputs of your
Yeah.
models. So there's like LM as a judge, or if you have ground truth, there's all these different like kind of traditional kind of similarity metrics you can do about text and stuff like that. But yeah, in terms of like evaluating the sort of like pathways and
Middleware,
tasks and
right?
behavior that one does, no, I haven't thought of anything about that before.
I came across this really good survey paper, I think it was yesterday, and I can put the link maybe in the show notes or something below that outlines a bunch of benchmarks. And I think it was just released in the last month or two, so it should be pretty recent. And there was tons of different methods for evaluation. And like you were saying, more output focused. But if anyone out there has any ideas other than creating our own custom eval set, which I think we might have to, like for benchmarks that actually evaluate the framework, not necessarily the system or the LLM itself, let us know. Because there's, I think if you're building for a very specific use case, like you've built I don't know, legal compliance agent, right? And you are doing evals on very specific use cases, it is more straightforward how to assess the like performance of the agent.
Yeah.
If you are assessing middleware, how do you assess middleware? Maybe like failure rate, but failure rate depends if you change the model or change the tools that are available or
Lots of variables.
yeah, there's so many variables. So it becomes a very hard thing to assess.
Wow. It's almost like you want to go through all permutation combinations, look for the output, and then test against it. This is like if there's something that anyone wants to learn more about, it's the evals part, right?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out their own way, and no one's really good at it yet because and by the time you do something, then the model itself changes, and then you
Yep.
want to do something entirely different with that, testing its newer skill set, challenging it more, and then you need another set of eval for that. It's almost like a never-ending loop. Yeah.
Well, in data science, this was always a same problem, right? Now it's a little bit more like amplified because like you were saying you can get a different checkpoint of the model that you think you haven't changed any of your code, but you have a different release of the model that you don't even know has happened. And so now your system prompt behaves differently, or it's not calling the right tool at the right time or something like that, not with your doing at all. So that's why constant evals are so important. But in more machine learning or traditional data science, we had to deal with model drift, right?
Hmm.
So it's kind of the same problem, it's just gotten more amplified.
Do we have eval agents? You hand it over to the agent, and the agent decides what to evaluate.
We have some stuff. I call it kind of like we call it like it's kind of like a senior reviewer, kind of like double checks the other agent via rule set. They're coming from similar sources, but proposed to the agents in different ways. Maybe that's similar to the stuff you've been doing with like the requirements framework.
Because so what you just described is a common pattern of validation called LLM as judge. And so that is a very common way of doing, like, I wouldn't necessarily call it I guess it could be used as a process of eval, but typically when I'm thinking about eval, I'm thinking about running it against like a set benchmark or running it
Yeah.
against user feedback that says up or down and something like that. But that is a quite a common version. And where now we have agent as judge. So it's like slightly even more advanced where you could have multiple
Exactly.
agents that are doing the LLM as judge. And so all these things are just becoming a little bit more incrementally advanced.
Yeah. Hand over to the agent. The agent hands over uh, eval set to to the LLM that says everything passed, or to someone that says nothing passed, and then you find someone in between.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
actually, to kind of wrap us up, I have one thing that I think is a theme I've been seeing. Coming back to the question you asked earlier in the show, I'm starting to see things that before were, and I think this LLM versus agent as judge is a perfect example. Started out as like simplified, now they're becoming systems.
Hmm.
So things like coding agents. Before it was you type what you want, it produces the code. But now they're systems, right? They're systems
For
of,
single use case, it just basically like it became a process and a system and like a a combination of steps rather than just one step, one response. Yeah. Yeah. Getting
yeah,
complex by the day.
yeah, exactly. And with entire applications built around them, right? And so um I am excited for things to continue to move that way because we had this tendency before to think that LLMs were magical and they're incredible, but they can't do everything themselves. And I think the rest of the things around the LLM didn't get the credit that they deserved. But now we're starting to see that the LLM can act as the brain or focal point, right, for decision making. But it's actually the system around it that makes it valuable.
Right.
Yes. I mean, to be honest, this type always existed. That's the reason you build a website, you build any application. System design is the most important thing you're tested against, right? To ensure that you understand when to use what and stuff. So now it's just you have new tools and you need to design your systems around those new tools to ensure that you use them the right way for their, what they're good at and use the others heuristics maybe even to ensure that you have like very important guardrails and things
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
All right. I have one more question for you before I know we're at the top of the hour here, but one more question before we wrap up. In your experience, if you had to say like one underrated skill of let's say this as like a
Use it for
data
show.
scientist, what would you consider to be like the most underrated characteristic or skill for them being successful?
So I can speak only from my own experience because I was this, right? As a data scientist, I had a very narrow skill set in terms of actual development capabilities because you're taught how to create models, right? That's what you did. You didn't, and how to clean data and how to do that, those pieces, right? I think those specialized roles are becoming less and less common, and we're needing to move further down and up the stack. And so if I had a recommendation for specifically someone like a data scientist that's in AI right now, it would be that if you haven't already, start experimenting with learning below and above the stack that you operate in, and build in the open. Because if you ever want to apply for any of these job that requires that, the best thing you can do is say, check out my project and here's a link to the repo, right? And that's what I tell everyone when I get a resume, especially where I see that they have good data science skills, but I need something that's below and up above the stack as well, like not just data scientists. I ask, hey, do you have any examples of work that you can show me where you built this into an application or
Hmm.
you built a back end or, just to understand the ability of them to learn, right? How quickly can you learn these things?
Yeah, I think that kind of I don't know, conglomeration of all these roles and breaking of different kind of barriers between them is something we're definitely seeing a lot of. I think I saw something like I feel like Figma CEO or someone said that they're like changing roles. Like everyone's like a product builder now. They're not necessarily in these very specific roles. So I think that's really great advice from you for anyone kind of getting into fields like, yeah, move up and down your kind of stack. Don't be in that one place anymore.
And I think that applies for if you're a designer, if you're
Hmm.
anything, right? If you're just a pure researcher, learn a little bit more about the applied side. If you're a designer, learn more not just how to create logos, but how do you create UIs? How do you build, not just design, but how do you actually build the thing?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, great. It was awesome having you on, Sandy. Really appreciate the time. Anything you want to plug here? I know you've got like a deep learning AI course, right? And I think you have a couple of Coursera courses as well. Yeah,
Well,
anything people
I'm
want to go
not
check
going to
out?
plug that, but there's another one coming out in the future
Okay.
with Google that when it comes time we can plug. But I will do one small plug. If you are interested in building AI agents with a secure framework, check out BAI. It's open source. We have community calls every month. We love to feature people that have built with it. And we're a friendly team. If you want to contribute, there's issues that are waiting for you.
Nice. Yeah. I was Googling BAI while we were on this podcast and it looks pretty cool. So yeah, go check
Okay.
it out, listeners. Thanks, Sandy, for joining. Thanks to our listeners for watching. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, like, and drop any comments below. See ya.
Thanks.